We've had a week since the draft, so the dust has settled. We've had some actual time to think about these rankings, and here are our top 36 Dynasty wide receiver rankings, including rookies. Now, tier one, there's not going to be a lot to talk about, right? We're going to talk about Jefferson, Lamb, Chase. You can take these three guys in whatever order you want. Right now in redraft leagues, I'm going to be going CD Lamb actually at the top of this list. But from a dynasty perspective, I'm a little bit less concerned about situation that we are talent. So I'm going to go with the most talented receiver in my opinion, which is Justin Jefferson for dynasty. Because even if this year it looks like Jefferson's probably going to have bad quarterback play, who knows? Maybe McCarthy ends up being good, right? I mean, it's possible. I mean, I'm hoping it does happen. So yeah, long-term, we're going to go Jefferson. Really, the question between these three wide receivers are, okay, well, are you taking them or a quarterback in these back half of round one of your startup? Like the real question that you should have is, okay, if it's a super flex league, am I going to be taking Justin Jefferson or Caleb Williams? Am I taking CD Lamb or Justin Herbert? That's more so the real conversation and how you want to structure your team. The rankings inside this top three, it's really your personal preference. Now, dropping down to our next two, I'm going to be going with Amon-Ra St. Brown, Marvin Harrison Jr. I'll say for sure Harrison's a way better prospect than St. Brown was, right? But it's very difficult to just ignore what Amon-Ra St. Brown's done so far in his NFL career. If you look at his age 24 season and compare that to wide receivers through history with the road of his screener at 24 years old, you have Hall of Fame level guys there like Larry Fitzgerald, maybe a throw, AJ Green, probably not. You got AJ Green, Odell, Brandon Marshall, Des Bryant, Marquise Colson, Percy Arvin, and then you had CD Lamb, Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, all with very similar seasons this past year. I mean, he just gets paid the absolute bag by the Detroit Lions. Detroit now, they don't have Reynolds, so it's like you have St. Brown, Jamison, Laporta. So I don't know. I think St. Brown's going to continue to dominate with targets. He's still extremely young. He can fit a rebuilding team, fit a contending team. And at the wide receiver position, I'm going to pretty much always go with the guy that we've seen the elite level production from before. Whereas at running back, I'm going to be a little more willing to give the edge to the rookie, where we're still going to have Harrison as the top 5 wide receiver in Dynasty, right? I mean, it's a great situation for him to be pairing up with Kyler Murray. He is immediately going to be the number 1 target in this offense, possibly seeing a 20 to 25% team target share as a rookie, which is almost unheard of. Phenomenal prospect, good situation to go to with all things considered. So yeah, I'm going to have him top 5. I just can't put him ahead of someone like St. Brown. And then going over to our next tier, we're going to have Puka Nacua. And now, I understand that some people are maybe hesitant and they want to say, oh, okay, well, Puka came from nowhere. Maybe we see some regression. Maybe Cup's a little bit better this next. I understand where you were coming from, and I would kind of like to say the same thing, but if you look at what Puka just did as a rookie, he was the best rookie of all time, at least at the wide receiver position. He broke records, right? The man went out, he averaged 9.5 targets per game. He averaged over 90 receiving yards per game. He went from an undrafted player in a lot of fantasy drafts to winning leagues. He was a legitimate league winner. You're looking at where he's getting drafted in underdog redraft leagues right now. He's a round 1 pick in redraft formats, and he's a second-year receiver. I was not on the Puka train before his rookie season. I wish I was. I'm an idiot that I wasn't. But to look at him now and not view him as a cornerstone asset that is pretty much locked and loaded to being a wide receiver 1 in fantasy based off what the historical data tells us of his season last year, I can't do it. If you want to make an argument, don't take him round 1 in a redraft league. You do you, but you have to have him as a mid-wide receiver 1 in Dynasty given his age. We're going to go Garrett Wilson next. Wilson's never had the same level of production of what Puka just did, but also Wilson has had horrendous quarterback play with Zach Wilson as a starting quarterback over the past 2 years. Going into this next season with Aaron Rodgers, going to be the best quarterback play he's ever seen. Obviously, long-term, you'd have your questions around it, though. But, I mean, still, extremely young wide receiver that has proven that he is talented based off market share numbers through the first 2 years of his career. Going over to our next guy, we will have Malik Neighbors. If you look at Neighbors, I mean, he finds himself in an interesting spot where you have pretty bad quarterback play, but maybe you make the argument that it's not a bad landing spot, just given the fact that he should be able to dominate from a target share perspective. So yeah, nobody to compete with him in New York. He's by far and away the top dog. You have a bad quarterback with Daniel Jones, but he's a phenomenal wide receiver prospect. I think he'd be the wide receiver 1 in the majority of draft classes if it wasn't for Harrison. And then also, I mean, if you're looking at underdog redraft leagues, being drafted at like the 2-3 turn right now, right? So that's where he's going for 2024. In Dynasty, you have to be freaking pumped. AJ Brown will be our next guy. AJ Brown a little bit older than the other wide receivers in this tier, of course. I mean, if I'm in a redraft league, I'm going to go AJ Brown over Wilson. I'm going to go with him over Neighbors. But if you're going to be looking at all these rankings pretty much throughout the rest, I really want to stay flexible with these wide receiver rankings, right? I mean, you have to consider if you're looking at a player like Garrett Wilson, for instance, Garrett Wilson fits a contending roster. Garrett Wilson fits a rebuilding team. So say you have Garrett Wilson in your league, say you draft him in your startup, and you were to go out there and you were to potentially look to sell Garrett Wilson, you would have 11 other owners that it could potentially make sense for them to go out there and buy him. Now, of course, there are going to be a couple owners in your league that don't like Wilson, that aren't interested, but that's besides the point. If you're looking at AJ Brown, the only team that makes sense to trade for him is a contending roster. There are probably 4 real contending teams in your league. And you need to hope that multiple of them need a receiver and like AJ Brown so you can start a bidding war. It's just so much harder to sell an asset like that than it would be one of those younger, more cornerstone pieces. Now, dropping down to our next tier, we're going to go Chris Olave at 10. I think Olave is a phenomenal wide receiver. I think if you look at his market share numbers through the first 2 years of his career, he's proven that he's a very talented player. I mean, this is a wide receiver that averaged over 9 targets per game this past season at 23 years old. Now, the reason we're going to have behind Wilson, even though Olave just had a better season than Wilson, is at least I can tell myself the story of, oh, okay, well, Garrett Wilson's going to get a quarterback upgrade this year. He's going from Zach Wilson to Aaron Rodgers. In the case of Olave, the situation's still very bad, right? So I can't come out here and make some massive case for Chris Olave saying we know he's talented and the situation's getting better. It's like, no, we know he's talented and you have to hope that somehow the situation changes. If you look at his age 23 season and compare that through time with the road of his screener, you're looking at Larry Fitzgerald, Stephon Diggs, Andre Johnson, with all similar 23-year-old seasons. Now, our next guy will be Rome Odunze. Now, if you look at Rome, you're probably not going to be adding him to like a contending build this season. You have to go through, compete with DJ Moore. DJ Moore is most likely going to be the wide receiver 1 for this Bears team. Then you have to also compete with Keenan Allen. I think, honestly, long-term, at least in the second half of this season, I'd probably like Rome to be ahead of Keenan Allen with the target totem pole in this offense. But, I mean, if we're looking at Keenan, he's still going to draw targets, right? He's still going to hurt Rome in the short term. So, obviously, when you're rostering Rome, it's more so going to be for that year 2 jump that you're going to expect. He should be able to help you this season, but I don't view him in the same light for a contending team as like Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave. And then our next guy will be Tyreek Hill, pure contending asset. We already know who he is, right? He's top 3 wide receiver this year, but he's pushing 30. So very similar to what we were talking about with AJ Brown, where AJ Brown probably only makes sense for a contending team to go out there and trade for him. Tyreek Hill is that, but a few years older and probably going to average more points per game. Drake London, another cornerstone asset here, someone you can contend with in the short term and contend with in the long term. And despite Drake London not being anywhere close to a top 24 wide receiver finish at any point of his NFL career, I'm probably too low on him. He's never finished close to this high, but this is a wide receiver that right now in underdog drafts is going at the beginning of the second round. In redraft leagues currently, which we are drafting every single night on the Flog Fantasy. Side note, the reason we have been uploading here as much is I'm streaming every single day now over on the Flog Fantasy YouTube channel with underdog drafts. So hope you hop in some drafts with us. We're going to be streaming every single day until the start of the season. Y'all know I freaking love underdog drafts, and it's about that time where we get them ramped up. So yeah, of course, if you want to draft with us too, you can find that link in the description, find it in the comment section. Yeah, if you're not already on underdog, I don't know what you're waiting for. It's best ball, so no time commitment at all during the year. It's how I draft hundreds of teams every offseason. That's how I won $150,000 on underdog 2 years ago. And yeah, if you sign up with code FLOCK, you're going to get a 100% deposit match up to $100. Plus, you're going to get access to flockfantasy.com where you can find my Dynasty Fantasy Football rankings, Dynasty Trade Calculator, Dynasty Team Analyzer, the whole 9 yards. Find that link in the description. But yeah, going over to our next tier, we're going to be looking at a massive tier here. This is where I think the drop-off is. I guess we'll talk about London a little bit more. London being drafted as a round 2 redraft pick right now, and the man is incredibly young. Pretty sure he's the same age as Zay Flowers. So yeah, I mean, it's in my mind, almost a safer pick now that they bring in Michael Penix with the top 10 NFL draft picks. So unlike the Garrett Wilson instance where you have Rodgers for this year and then we don't exactly know what to expect in the long term, at least the Falcons, have a shot to have answered that question. Now, going over to the next tier, this is where it's going to expand out. This is where the tiers are pretty flat and I don't know what to do. We're going to throw Jalen Waddle here at 14. Waddle's someone that I always overvalue. Don't listen to my ranking with Waddle. Waddle won us a bunch of money 2 years ago, so for whatever reason, I feel like we have to rank him high. Jokes aside, pretty young, pretty productive. I think an extremely talented wide receiver. He has disappointed. He did disappoint last season, of course, so I know he's left a sour taste in people's mouth. Devonta Smith, Brandon Ayuk, and Waddle, all these guys are in a similar mold in that if you're a rebuilding team, you don't have to sell them, right? Like you can hold on to these wide receivers on a rebuilding roster. No problem. Their value is probably going to maintain. Maybe it dips a little bit. But if I'm a rebuilding team, I'm definitely throwing them on the trade block, right? If I can sell Waddle, Ayuk, or Devonta Smith and pick up like 2 future first-round picks, I'll get on a rebuilding team, get them up my roster, and please give me that price so we can go through and stack future value. So it is an interesting spot where you don't have to, they're not Tyreek Hill. You don't have to sell them on a rebuilding roster, but you should at least throw them on the trade block if you are doing so. But we know they're young-ish. They're in their prime. They're talented. They're not true wide receiver ones. I think that's what we know now. Now, going over to our next two guys, we're going to go Jordan Addison, Zay Flowers. What have we learned year after year after year for God knows how long now? Wide receivers that were decent to good prospects that have a good rookie season are guys that we want to bet heavily on. We've approved it with in-depth research videos all offseason where we went through and we did the historical analysis dating back over the past 10 years. And the vast majority of times, if a wide receiver gains value their rookie season, they will continue to gain value going into the following year. You want to buy high on those year 2 wide receivers. Addison, Zay, both had great year 1s, both strong prospects, both NFL round 1 draft picks. In the case of Addison, I think he's the better player. Of course, he has significantly more competition with Justin Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson in town. And you are having to bank on McCarthy being good at this price. So I'll tell you right now, I am much higher on Jordan Addison than I'd imagine where the majority of other people are. Like, let me pull up the community rankings on the site. I'll give you the community ranking with Jordan Addison on the site, and I will also give you the expert ranking to get a decent idea. Of course, community rankings on flogfantasy.com are free. If you just literally ever want to pull them up, you can go out there and look at them. But yeah, if I'm looking at this, dear God, Jordan Addison is at wide receiver 18. So actually, I'm not as high on him as I thought. That's a community ranking. The expert ranking, he's wide receiver 19. So it really is like Nico Collins or Addison. I just think that Addison, Zay, if I'm a rebuilding team, cool. I don't need to sell these guys. I just throw them down there in our wide receiver 2 slot. We're chilling. Nico Collins, DJ Moore, Michael Pittman, T. Higgins. They're very similar to the Waddle, Ayuk, Devonta Smith molds, where these are guys that are young enough where you can say that they have the extended runway where if you're a rebuilding team, you don't need to sell them, right? You don't need to sell Nico Collins if you're a rebuilding roster. You don't need to sell Michael Pittman if you're a rebuilding roster. You don't need to sell T. Higgins, but you probably should throw them on the trade block and see what you can get. So, it's an interesting mold. I just think it's so damn hard to rank all the wide receivers in this tier. And I can come out here and I can try to give you my thought process. And maybe I think DJ Moore scores 0.6 more points per game this next season than Michael Pittman does. But does that really move the needle? Is there a massive gap here in either their short-term expectations or long-term expectations? Probably not. So in this tier, it probably just comes down to your personal preference. Now, of course, you can go to the comment section and scream at me, oh, DJ Moore needs to be up a wide receiver 14. This is clownish. Sure, you do you. I don't care if you want to move them up that high. They're about the same. Now, dropping down to our next tier, there's going to be a massive tier that we're going to have with rookies here. These are guys that we do not know if they are good yet. I think that there are a lot of signs to point to them being good, and they have very high ceilings, but they don't have the security of the DJ Moore, Nico Collins, Zay Flowers, Jordan Addison range, where we've seen those wide receivers in the NFL, and we know that they are very talented. We're going to start off Brian Thomas Jr. Brian Thomas Jr., I had him as the wide receiver 4 in this rookie class coming into the NFL draft. Then he goes higher than all these other rookie wide receivers in this tier in the NFL draft. And he finds himself in a good landing spot, right? I'm not going to say it's Buffalo. I'm not going to say it's Kansas City, but he finds himself with Trevor Lawrence in an offense where he can be the wide receiver 1. So yeah, I like Brian Thomas. We're picking hairs here for trying to choose the guys between these tiers. Xavier Worthy will be our next wide receiver 24. Now, this was the dream landing spot, of course, right? And it's the perfect fit, creative head coach, best quarterback in the league with one of, not the fastest wide receivers in the league coming in. So the immediate comp that probably isn't a comp that a lot of people want to talk about, just given speed, Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, is Tyreek Hill. But we have seen that a lot of these times, these smaller, speedy wide receivers will come in and they'll probably be better real life receivers than they will be fantasy options. It's hard to immediately assume that they are just going to get a ton of volume. And instead, you could see them not be gadgety players, but be moved all over the football field, run deep routes, clear out space underneath. And then instead, what ends up happening is we end up getting 9 targets a game from Travis Kelce, and he scores all the fantasy points, right? I hook 'em horns, still love Worthy, love the situation. Just trying to explain why I think maybe the prototype of like Brian Thomas Jr. ends up at the end of the day commanding more target volume than Xavier Worthy. Ladd McConkey will be our next guy at 25. Fully transparent with you, Ladd and Keon, our next 2 wide receivers, I don't love them as prospects. They don't hit the same metric profiles that we want to see from like Brian Thomas Jr., from Xavier Worthy, from a production perspective. However, if we are looking at Ladd and Keon, one, the film community loves them, right? Anybody who watches football says, oh my gosh, you should see Ladd's route running ability. Oh my gosh, you should see how athletic and how dynamic Keon Coleman is. That's what the film grinders love about those 2 wide receivers. And hell, we saw 2 NFL organizations take these guys inside the top 40 picks of the NFL draft. And almost more important than anything with these 2 wide receivers in particular is they can potentially be the wide receiver 1 options for Justin Herbert and Josh Allen. So how much does it matter for me to come out here and say, oh, I didn't love them as prospects? Who gives a damn, right? Should you listen to me? Should you listen to John Harbaugh and potentially Justin Herbert's number 1 target? You probably should just go with the guy that can be Herbert's number 1. So yeah, I think you have to be excited about these players. Rice and Dell, I know it looks like we're way too low on these guys. I'm going to move Dell ahead of Rice. I don't even know what we should do. I know it looks like we're very low on Rice and Dell. And you can go to the comment section and you scream at me that we need to move these guys up. But what I'm genuinely curious, I don't care if you rank Rice. I don't care if you rank Dell over Brian Thomas Jr. They're all in the same tier. Like I said, inside the tiers, you do you. What I am genuinely curious, though, is are you taking Rice and Dell over the wide receivers, the tier above, right? That 14 through 22 range, where all those guys are pretty close. I almost don't even want to have numbers next to their names because they are about the same. But like, I think you can make a strong argument to be taking Rice Dell over Pittman Higgins. Because with Rice and Dell, very similar to what we were talking about with Addison and Flowers, it's almost the same thing, right? I mean, these are wide receivers that come in, they gain a lot of value after year 1. And we typically know we want to be betting on these guys and buying high after a strong rookie wide receiver season. Now, the difference between Rice and Dell and Addison and Zay Flowers, in my mind, 2 differences. One, I think Addison and Flowers were much better prospects coming into the NFL, indicated, 1, by what everybody, including myself, thought last offseason, and 2, based off the fact that those were 2 round 1 NFL draft picks. The second thing that we're going to look at here is what these respective teams did during the offseason. If you are looking at the Chiefs and the Houston Texans, the Chiefs went out and they took a wide receiver round 1. The Houston Texans went out there and they traded for Stephon Diggs, which isn't the end of the world, right? I'm not coming out here and saying, oh my gosh, Rice and Dell are now going to be bums because it happened. Of course, I'm not saying that. But if we look at what Addison's team did, if we look at what Zay Flowers' team did, They didn't bring in anybody, right? They let KJ Osborne walk. Maybe say, oh, they re-signed Rashad Bateman. Who cares? They let Odell Beckham Jr. walk. So the reason I think that we can have Addison and Zay the tier ahead of Rice and Dell, one, the priors that we had on those two receivers. Two, what the teams did in the offseason. And three, also, Tank Dell's like a year older than Kyle Pitts. Tank Dell's going to be 25 years old this season. Debo Samuel will be our last guy in this year. I mean, with Debo, we saw the Niners just go out there and take a wide receiver round one, of course, but you still have hopefully a decent amount of production. I mean, he's going like into round two, beginning of round three in underdog drafts right now. Just clearly a contending asset, right? But I do want to reiterate for the millionth time, 14 through 29, razor thin. These are two tiers. I don't want to act like, oh, I have this guy wide receiver 28, so I'm super low on him. No, it's two tiers. They're very, very close. Now, 13 and beyond is a lot higher than those two tiers. And I think 30 and below is a lot lower than those two tiers. So if you strongly disagree that JSN should be ahead of anybody the tier above him, there I am willing to argue, and there I'm willing to try to make my opinion known. JSN will be our next wide receiver 30. Loved him as a prospect. I mean, I was all in on JSN last offseason. I still want to come out here and say that he has a lot of upside. I want to believe in him. Yes, we'll go through the bullish case. We'll go through the bearish case. Of course, y'all heard me say this all offseason last year, and you're probably tired of it by now. But JSN was more productive at Ohio State on the same roster, the same season than Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. JSN was a sophomore, Wilson was a junior, and Olave was a senior. And JSN was the top dog in that offense if you were looking at target volume, if you were looking at receiving yards per game. It's one thing. The second bullish sentiment that you can have on JSN is you're going to have to explain away his rookie season, because his rookie season was bad. Don't get me wrong. We'll talk about that on the Bears side. But his rookie season, you can say, Mason, come on, man. He had an injury going into the year. DK Metcalf, wide receiver 1. Tyler Lockett, wide receiver 2. What the hell are you expecting from the man? That's what you would say if you are all in on JSN this season. Now, you could also say, coaching staff has changed. Maybe this prior coaching staff didn't like Jackson Smith and Jigba, and this new coaching staff, well, maybe that's your argument. Those are, I think, the three pillars of the JSN argument. Really strong prospect, tough setup for his rookie season, and situation changing in year 3. That would be your argument for him. Your argument against him would be bad rookie season. If you look at the historical data, the vast majority, I mean, we did the math at the beginning of the offseason, back when people were trying to tell you to take JSN over Rome. I know y'all remember that. I mean, please don't act like I was crazy for thinking that. I don't know if I made it up. No, people are screaming at me that we are dumb to say Rome over JSN. But anyway, here we are. But anyway, what we were talking about way back then is if you look at the historical data, wide receivers that went in round 1 of the NFL draft to have a JSN type rookie season, the vast majority of times they are bust. Do I think JSN's a bust? Do I think he is going to break out in year 2? I don't know. I'm going to rank him at wide receiver 30. I'm going to rank him behind the guys that are coming in as rookies that have strong upside cases that haven't busted at the NFL or haven't shown any weakness at the NFL level yet. The Brian Thomas, the Xavier Worthy, the Ladd McConkey, the Keon Coleman. I'm going to have to take those guys that have showed zero weakness at the NFL level. I'm going to take the guys that we've seen be good at the NFL level, aka Rashee Rice, Tank Dell, Zay Flowers, Jordan Addison, and all those like middle-aged veterans. I'm going to take those guys ahead of JSN, but he does have upside. I'm rooting for the guy. I really am. Jaden Reed, maybe you say, Mason, what the hell? You just said you're taking the guys that have proven that they're good at the NFL. Jaden Reed has proven that he's good at the NFL level. The question is, how good is Reed? How good is Love? Was it just Jordan Love that went through and really elevated this offense? I don't know. Jaden Reed, wide receiver, I didn't love his prospect. I actually drafted a lot of him in rookie drafts last year. Rookie drafts, I drafted a lot of Reed. I drafted a lot of Rice, primarily just based off what their NFL draft capital was and where they're going in rookie drafts. We're going to go Diggs, 32. You're drafting a veteran wide receiver that obviously is as old as Tyreek Hill, but doesn't project out to be nearly as productive as Tyreek Hill. I mean, you're maybe expecting to get, 23 points per game from Tyreek and maybe expecting to get 17 to 18 points per game from Diggs. And at this point of their respective careers, all that matters is going to be short-term production. And George Pickens will be our next guy, 33. So there have been a lot of rumors at the time of this recording that the Steelers are in the market, that they may be going for Metcalf, that they may be going for another wide receiver to bring in. Which, if that happens, cool. All right. I mean, I think George Pickens can thrive alongside a wide receiver like DK Metcalf from a real life perspective. I think it'll really help the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think it'll really help George Pickens not to be the wide receiver one from a real life perspective. Now, from a fantasy perspective, of course, it's not a great thing for another top dog to come in from a target share perspective. I don't know why I'm saying perspective so many times, but moving on. DK Metcalf, our next guy at 34. I understand people are really going to hate to see this. With DK Metcalf, this is a wide receiver that has now had 3 straight seasons averaging about the wide receiver 26 finish. He's had 3 straight seasons of being a high-end wide receiver 3 in fantasy. This was someone drafted back in 2019. So am I looking at Metcalf thinking, okay, a wide receiver going into what? He played 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023. Going into year 6, that has had 3 straight seasons of pretty much high-end wide receiver 3 finish. He has a ton of upside. I don't know if you look at the TV screen, it looks like it, right? I mean, DK Metcalf pretty much has the same body that I do, which is incredible. Congrats to you, my guy. You're almost as tall as me. You're almost as muscular as me. So, I mean, you think he has a lot of upside just based off what he looks like. But, I mean, if you actually look at the numbers, if you look at the target volume, if you look at the points per game, not exactly there. But A.D. Mitchell and Xavier Legette, they'll be our next guys, 35, 36. I think Mitchell probably has a higher ceiling based off the offense he's playing in. I don't really like either prospect. Y'all know, I mean, I've said it a million times. Look at the yards per route run with Mitchell. Look at Xavier Legette. I mean, just taking 5 years to break out in college. So I think you can make an argument from a prospect perspective against potentially both these guys, but I think you have to have them top 36 based off what film guys say about them and based off where they just went in the NFL draft. But I think that's all I have for you. Again, thank you. Appreciate you, ladies and gentlemen. Of course, if you have not done so already, hit that like, subscribe if you play Dynasty. And if you want to hop in and draft with us, we're going to be live streaming on the Flock Fantasy YouTube channel pretty much every single day until the season starts. We're going to be doing underdog drafts, which I know everybody watching this already knows, but somehow if you don't know what it is, best ball drafts, no time commitment during the year, a ton of fun. And yeah, that's what I'm going to be drafting. And if you want to get in a draft with me, links in the description, links in the comment section, code FLOCK, get you hooked up with a 100% deposit match, plus access to flockfantasy.com where you can find all our Dynasty rankings. But thank you again. Really appreciate you. Really hope you have a great day. And hope we get to see you out in a live stream, probably tonight on the Flock Fantasy channel.